Inside the halls of one of the most respected medical research centers in the country, chaos had settled like dust after a storm. Broken glass glittered beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, the scent of antiseptic mixed with something metallic, blood. And in the center of it all stood a black woman in a white lab coat, her wrists locked behind her by two security officers. She didn't scream, didn't beg, but her eyes, Lord, her eyes, burned with a fire that made everyone around her freeze in place. Her name was Naomi, 28 years old, but the woman in that coat wasn't the one who'd earned it. It should have belonged to her twin sister, Leah. Leah had always been the steady one, quiet, brilliant, the kind who believed science could heal the world. Naomi, on the other hand, had fists like iron and a spirit too wild for rules. They were different in nearly every way, except when it came to love. They had no one else, no parents, no family, just each other. So when Leah died alone in her apartment, her skin cold and bruised, Naomi knew something was wrong. Leah never touched needles, never even took painkillers for a headache, and yet there they were, needle marks, clear as day. The police shrugged it off. Another overdose in the city, case closed. But Naomi wasn't built to walk away. She didn't cry, she didn't plead. She disappeared. And the next morning, a woman with Leah's lab coat and Leah's badge walked through the front doors of the institute. Her hair tied back, just like her sister's, her shoulders square with purpose. What she found inside was worse than she imagined. Cruelty, racism, and whispered rumors about what Leah had agreed to behind closed doors. But Naomi wasn't there to be silent. She was there to find the truth. And when she did, you make sure everyone heard it. So if you've ever wondered what a sister's love looks like when justice turns its back, or what happens when a woman with nothing left to lose walks into a world built to keep her out, don't go anywhere. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's a reckoning. And reckoning doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it starts with silence. Naomi walked those marble corridors with a calm that came only from pain buried too deep to show. Every step echoed with purpose, every passing white coat too busy or too blind to look her in the eye. That was fine. She didn't come to be seen, she came to see. The lab felt colder than she remembered. Sterile. Inhuman. Leah used to joke it smelled like a funeral home. Naomi had laughed back then, not knowing how prophetic that would become. She took her sister's place like a ghost, wearing borrowed skin, familiar enough to pass, unfamiliar enough to ache. Her fingers shook the first time she held Leah's ID badge, but by the third day she wore it like armor. She kept her head down, she scrubbed glassware, filed reports, and listened. Or how she listened. To the way her white colleagues snapped their fingers at her, called her the help when they thought no one else could hear, to the way Leah's name was muttered with disdain, or not at all, and especially to the rumors, dark, half-whispered confessions behind half-closed doors. They said Leah had volunteered for off-record clinical trials, that she'd been compliant, that Eric, the director, had taken a special interest in her. Naomi's hands clenched every time, but she said nothing. Well, yeah. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, she opened Leah's locker. The combination hadn't changed. 2 turns left, 3 right, back once. Inside was nothing but a spiral notebook wrapped in plastic and a photo of the two of them smiling in front of the old Bronx gym where Naomi used to train. She pulled out the notebook. It was filled with codes, dosages, trial logs, names of test subjects, and some crossed out in red ink. Leah had been tracking everything. At the bottom of the last page, scribbled hastily in shaky handwriting, were just 4 words. "If I disappear, Eric." Naomi closed the notebook with trembling fingers. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she requested access to Lab C, a restricted space in the lower wing. She expected denial. Instead, Eric himself summoned her. She followed the call like a soldier walking toward war. His office smelled like cedarwood and secrets. He greeted her like an old friend, called her Leah. She didn't correct him. "Thought you'd be braver than this," he said, circling her like a hawk. Naomi didn't flinch. "Brave enough to lie still." His eyes glinted. "Then let's begin." She sat on the medical cot. He snapped on gloves. Pulls a syringe. As the cold metal brushed her arm, she whispered, "Do you always inject your staff with unapproved drugs, or just the ones without families?" He froze, just for a breath, then smiled. "Ah." "You knew," he said. "Not a question, a statement, a confession." I know what you did to her. His voice dipped low. Your sister begged for that trial. Don't rewrite her history just because she couldn't handle it. She was terrified of needles. And yet she kept showing up. Guess feeding you wasn't cheap. Naomi's vision blurred. Not with tears, with rage. Deep, bone-deep rage that cracked something wide open inside her. He raised the syringe again. One more dose, you'll be just like her. Naomi moved before he finished the sentence. Her elbow caught him square in the jaw. The syringe clattered to the floor. He lunged, but Naomi was faster. Years of fight training roared to life. She flipped the tray table, grabbed a glass vial, smashed it across his temple. The sound was sickening. He stumbled, dazed. She didn't stop. Fist, knee, palm. She struck him with everything Leah never got the chance to say. The door burst open. 3 guards. Then 5. Naomi didn't care. One by one they came, and one by one she brought them down. Her body remembered the rhythm of pain, the language of fists. But even she couldn't fight forever. They overwhelmed her, pinned her down, hands twisted her arms behind her back, and still she smiled, because tucked deep inside her coat pocket was Leah's voice. A recording pattern activated the moment she entered Eric's office. As they dragged her out, she let it drop. Eric's voice filled the room. Every word, his cruelty, his experiment, his racism, poured out like poison. The room fell silent. And then, just like that, the reckoning began. It didn't start with sirens, it didn't need to. The silence in that hallway, the stunned expressions of researchers, the frozen hands of the guards, the tremor in Eric's eyes when his own voice filled the room, was louder than any alarm. You black girls sure last long. Can't believe you're still alive after the last dose. The words echoed like a curse. Someone gasped, someone else dropped a clipboard, and Naomi, bloody and bruised, raised her chin as the officers stopped dragging her and turned instead toward him. Is this true? One asked, the disbelief barely hiding the fury behind it. Eric didn't speak, but his silence was louder than a scream. The pen clicked off, the room exhaled. A second later, the cuffs meant for Naomi clamped around Eric's wrists. From that point on, the story unraveled fast, like a thread pulled loose from the hem of a lie that had been stitched together too long. Within hours, the news hit the media. Black lab assistant exposes illegal human testing at Federal Research Institute. At first, they used Leah's name. Naomi didn't correct them, not yet. Whistleblowers emerged. 2 interns, a night janitor, even a former lab tech who had left the institute 3 months earlier. Each one revealed small pieces of a bigger horror: the secret drug trials, the off-book experimentation, the unreported deaths. And worst of all, the pattern. Almost every test subject had been black, poor, isolated, and every one of them had been selected by Eric himself. It was never about science, it was about control. Naomi watched the truth flood out into the world like sunlight into a locked room. She should have felt triumphant, but she didn't, because Leah was still gone. And justice doesn't feel like justice when the person you fought for isn't here to see it. A week later, Naomi was escorted back into the institute, not in handcuffs, but as a protected federal witness. She had one request. Leah's things. They handed her a sealed cardboard box and a quiet apology. Naomi took it back to the apartment where they'd once shared takeout on the floor and danced to Motown until they laughed so hard they cried. Inside the box was Leah's old planner. Naomi flipped through the pages, stopping at the week before her death. A single sticky note fluttered out. He knows I'm scared. He says, that makes the data better. Naomi stared at the words, numb. How many times had Leah smiled at her, hidden behind that gentle face, and said she was just tired? But she hadn't been tired, and she'd been terrified, and she'd said nothing, not to protect herself, but to protect her. Naomi crumpled the note in her hand and sank to the floor. She cried for the first time in weeks, not out of grief, but out of guilt, because Leah had suffered in silence just so Naomi could keep chasing a dream. The trial began 3 months later. The courtroom was packed. News cameras, legal teams, civil rights advocates, government investigators. Naomi sat in the front row every day, flanked by the same officers who once held her down. Eric pled not guilty. His lawyers claimed Naomi had framed him, that the recordings were doctored, that Leah had volunteered freely, but it didn't matter. because halfway through the second week, a second voice recording surfaced, one Naomi had never heard before. It had come from the janitor. He had found Leah's old tablet buried in a trash bin in the basement, its battery half dead. On it was a recording Leah had made the night before she died. Her voice shook. "I'm scared. I think this drug is affecting my heart. I don't want to do this anymore. But if I stop," he says that Naomi will be out on the streets. He says he'll pull the funding. If anything happens to me, please, someone tell her I tried. The courtroom held its breath. Naomi's eyes burned. It was the one thing she never got from her sister, the goodbye. Now she had it. Eric's defense fell apart. The verdict was unanimous. Life in prison, no parole. But that wasn't the ending. Because as Naomi stood outside the courthouse, reporters shouting questions, a small girl in a too big hoodie approached her. She was maybe 13, skin like Leah's, hair pulled back in tight curls. "Are you the woman who stopped the doctor?" she asked. Naomi blinked. "I guess so." The girl held something out, a homemade card. On the front, a drawing of a superhero in a white lab coat and boxing gloves. Inside, "Thank you, you saved someone like me." Naomi smiled, tears threatening again. The reckoning wasn't just about punishment. It was about who got to live. And not just to survive, but to live with dignity, without fear, without being treated as less than. That's what Leah had been fighting for, even in silence. Not just her life, but Naomi's. The lives of others who might never know how close they came to becoming a statistic, an unmarked grave, another forgotten face in a system that didn't care to remember. Naomi understood that now. And so, even with Eric behind bars, she didn't stop. She couldn't, because the truth was uglier than she had imagined. Leah hadn't been the first, and if no one spoke up, she wouldn't be the last. Naomi turned down interviews. She avoided the book deals and talk show offers. What she did instead was far quieter and far more powerful. She told Leah's story in schools, at churches, in battered community centers with flickering lights and too few chairs. She stood in front of crowds, mostly black, mostly poor, and told them what happened to her sister. How it started, how no one believed her, how no one even bothered to ask the right questions until it was too late. And people listened. Not because Naomi was famous, but because she told the truth, and because the truth sounded familiar. You familiar? A woman in Detroit stood up after one of Naomi's talks and said, "My cousin went in for a clinical trial at a private hospital. He was never the same again. No one believed us." A retired nurse in Atlanta whispered through tears, "They used to separate the black patients, gave us different meds. I always wondered why." Even in the quietest towns, echoes of Leah's story emerged, like buried bones coming up through the soil. What Naomi learnt was this: her sister hadn't died in isolation. She'd died in the middle of a pattern older than Eric, older than that institute, older than either of them. Medical racism wasn't new. It had roots. From the Tuskegee study to forced sterilizations to underfunded hospitals in black communities, Leah had been the latest leaf on a dying branch. But Naomi could water the roots of something different. She started a foundation in Leah's name, not with millions, just with what she had. Donations came in from strangers, old teachers, even a retired boxer Naomi once trained with. It was enough to launch a program offering legal support for whistleblowers in the medical field, especially those too scared to speak out alone. They called it the Leah Initiative. It didn't make headlines, but it saved lives. One nurse, pressured to administer a drug still in testing, reached out anonymously and got help. A young man in clinical trials discovered he hadn't signed full consent forms until Naomi's team showed him the fine print he never knew existed. The changes were slow, but they were real. Still, none of that erased the silence. The moments Naomi still woke in the middle of the night, reaching for a sister who wasn't there. The days she caught herself dialing Leah's number out of habit. The ache of memory that hit hardest in the quiet. At laundromats, red lights, the end of songs. One afternoon, nearly a year later, Naomi returned to the cemetery. There was no camera, no press, just her in a folded chair. She sat down by Leah's stone, running her fingers over the engraved name. "I wish I'd known," she whispered. "I wish I'd." Wind stirred the grass. The sky above was cloudless. I still have questions, Naomi admitted, about why it had to be you, about why people like Eric keep getting away with things like this until it's too late. She wiped her eye. But I have answers now too, and they came from you. You fought in the only way you knew how. You kept going so I could keep dreaming. And now I know your dream was bigger than mine. She stood and placed a fresh white coat across the grave. Leah's name was stitched into the chest pocket, the same coat Naomi had worn the day she exposed Eric, the coat that didn't belong to her, but had protected her just the same. I'm done fighting with my fists, Naomi said, but not with my voice. And with that she turned away, one hand in her pocket, touching the same recording pen that had changed everything. Because justice isn't a moment. It's a decision. One you make again and again, even when no one's watching. Even when the person you love most is gone. And even then, especially then, you keep going. As if Leah could endure what she did for someone else's future, that Naomi would honor her the only way that mattered, by building one. That was the promise Naomi made at Leah's grave, a vow shaped not by vengeance, but by the quiet kind of love that doesn't disappear when someone is gone. And for a while, she kept that promise, one day at a time, one voice, one story, one saved life. But just when it seemed like the story had ended, when the villain was behind bars, when the news had moved on, when the crowds stopped asking for interviews, something happened. Something no one expected. Yeah, it started with a phone call. Unlisted number. Early morning. Naomi almost didn't answer. Miss Brooks, the voice said, low and urgent. You need to hear this. The line went dead. She stared at the screen, confused. A minute later, a text came through. There's a video. Naomi hesitated before tapping play. The footage was grainy, like it had been shot from a hidden camera. A hospital corridor. White coats moved in and out of frame. Then, Naomi froze. But it wasn't old. It wasn't from his time at the Institute. It was dated 3 days ago. Somehow, some way, Eric had escaped. Or worse, someone had let him go. The clip showed him inside a private medical facility overseas. Naomi recognized the logo, an unregulated research hub in South America known for disappearing clinical data and burying complaints in red tape. But the man who destroyed Leah's life was free, and he was back to doing exactly what he had done before. She dropped the phone. Her hands trembled. It wasn't over. Naomi made calls, dozens, lawyers, journalists, the Department of Justice, but no one could give her a clear answer. Eric's transfer paperwork had gone missing, the warden had resigned, and somehow a sealed motion had been filed under a privacy clause that allowed him medical relocation due to a terminal diagnosis. Terminal. The man looked anything but sick in the video. The realization hit her like a punch. They helped him. Not just one person, the system. The same system that hadn't protected Leah, that had looked the other way the first time. So Naomi made a decision. If the law couldn't stop him, she would. 2 weeks later, Naomi stepped off a plane in a sweltering, humid city where no one wore name tags and everyone spoke in coded tones. She wasn't alone. An independent journalist named Clara had agreed to follow the lead. Together, they tracked down the clinic. It was buried behind tall fences and fake construction signs. Naomi posed as a patient. Clara pretended to be her sister. Inside, the walls were clean. The smiles were fake. And in the far wing, past 2 locked doors and a badge-controlled elevator, they found it. Another lab. Now go. She couldn't have been more than 19. Thin, pale, eyes distant, the way Leah's must have looked in those final days. They saw Eric through the window, syringe in hand. He was smiling. Naomi didn't wait. She kicked open the door so hard the hinges screamed. Eric looked up, shocked but not scared. Not yet. Naomi, he said, voice calm, you came. She stepped inside. No coat, no pretense, just the fury of a sister who had nothing left to lose. Step away from her. Eric tilted his head. You really don't understand, do you? You think this is about race, about cruelty, but this is the future. Pain builds resistance. Sacrifice makes progress. Leah was not your sacrifice, Naomi whispered. She was the first, he said, almost reverently. You'll be the last. He lunched. Clara screamed. Naomi moved faster. She tackled him into the metal tray table, vials shattered, the girl on the cot sobbed. Eric reached for the syringe. Naomi grabbed his wrist, and this time she didn't punch. She took the syringe and held it to his throat. He froze. "Do it," he hissed. "You want justice? Go on, make me your martyr." She didn't blink. Instead, she turned the syringe and injected it into the floor. "You don't get to die," she said softly. "You get to be exposed again." Behind her, Claire had already gone live. The camera streamed the whole thing, his face, the equipment, the trembling girl, the truth. By the time authorities arrived, the footage had spread across the internet like wildfire. Eric didn't go to trial this time. There was no need. Every government who had ever funded him, every sponsor who had ever backed his research, every official who had signed his release, they were all named. The system had been cracked open, and for once it couldn't hide. Back home, Naomi stood once again at Leah's grave. This time she brought flowers and her foundation's first annual report. She knelt beside the stone. "It's done," she said, tears in her eyes. "For real this time." And for the first time in a long while she smiled. Because justice hadn't just come, it stayed. This ending ties all themes together: grief, justice, social awareness, and delivers a heartfelt message to your mature American audience with a gentle emotional tone. It finishes with a clear call to action encouraging viewers to subscribe and stay engaged. Because justice hadn't just come, it stayed. And that, Naomi realized, was the quiet revolution Leah had dreamed of. Not justice for one, but protection for many. Not a single trial, but a shift in what people believed they deserved. For too long, too many had accepted injustice as a part of life, especially those without wealth, without connections, without protection. Well, now they were learning to fight back. Naomi didn't return to her old life. That chapter had closed the moment she stepped into Leah's lab coat. But she also didn't carry only loss anymore. In its place grew something steadier, purpose, not fiery like grief, but strong like roots. Each month, the Lee Initiative expanded. New volunteers, new advocates, whistleblower hotlines in 5 states, medical consent workshops in underserved neighborhoods, a traveling exhibit called Silence No More, where Leah's story stood beside others, men and women who had suffered, survived, and spoken. Naomi didn't lead the spotlight. She handed the mic to others, survivors, students, nurses, who had seen too much for too long. And everywhere she went, someone said the same thing. "Thank you. I thought I was alone." But perhaps the most unexpected moment came one afternoon when she returned to the Institute. Now, under new leadership, the building had been renamed, the walls repainted, the security guards trained differently, and in the atrium, where a brass plaque once honored the man who nearly destroyed his sister's life, now stood a quiet glass case. Inside it was Leah's white lab coat, clean, pressed, framed with care. And beneath it, a line etched in silver: Leah Brooks, researcher, sister, fighter. Her silence ended with a voice that changed everything. Naomi stood in front of it for a long time. People passed by, some slowed down, a few read the inscription, others... That was fine, because the ones who needed to see it would. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, whispered, "We made it, sis." And in that moment, she didn't feel alone at all. If Leah's story moved you, if Naomi's courage inspired you, or if you believe every life, no matter how small, poor, or overlooked, matters, then you're in the right place. Because these aren't just stories. They're real warnings, real wounds, and real strength. And we'll keep telling them. So if you believe in justice, in truth, and in the power of one voice to spark change, hit that subscribe button and join us. We're just getting started. Thank you for watching. Remember, every voice counts, especially yours.